So we talked about unemployment. Now we're going to finish up this chapter talking about inflation rate. All right. Again, we're providing information for policymakers to make a decision. Now, to understand what inflation does, you have to understand the concept of purchasing power of a dollar. So the dollar isn't, something that stays the same all the time. It fluctuates with the price of things, or with inflation or deflation. Now let's assume you have a dollar, and last year you had a 5% inflation rate for that whole year. How does the dollar work for you this year? So you bought that much stuff with that dollar last year. That same dollar now only buys you 95 cents worth of the stuff that you bought last year this year. So if you had $1,000 and you bought $1,000 worth of stuff and you had that same 1,000, this year you can only buy $950 worth. So somewhere you're going to get rid of some of the stuff that you used to buy. In other words, your standard of living drops. Inflation is not good if your money doesn't grow, if your paycheck doesn't increase. And if you keep doing that, what happens is your standard of living is this kind of a home, but if inflation keeps going, you get this kind of a home. Right? Not good. So let's go ahead and take a look at the last note sheet on this one, called inflation. First off, we have to understand a consumer price index, because this is where we get the numbers to compute our inflation. Now the consumer price index, think about it as a shopping cart, and there's about 400 products in it, and these are 400 products that people normally buy. And we look at this year in and year out. Now sometimes the products change depending on if they're in use or not. Now, the people that we're talking about, the average urban, now if we're talking about urban, who are we missing? You're right, rural, we're missing all the farm folks. So here we basically have the city and the suburbs. That's it. The average urban city buyer, the 400 products that the household consumer buys. So we're leaving out business, government, and the rest of the world, and we're leaving out all the urban folks. So we've got the city, we left out the farm, the rural, we got households, we're leaving out business, government, and the world. Now why? Because generally speaking, now this was in the book, but we know that households buy 69%, so it's a little bit lower here, a little bit higher here, but still 69% is the lion's share of purchases. Households, urban versus rural, about 75% of the households. Again, we're looking at the most. In other words, go back to that horseshoe, hand grenade, and nuclear weapons. We're getting in the ballpark. And besides which, businesses are only going to buy stuff because people want it. So this is going to be an indicator of businesses. And government is supposed to be only spending what we want also. So that's another indicator of households. So you can take a look at that and say, okay, all I have to track is people that buy stuff in the city. Now it's really simple, because when you go buy stuff, what has to happen? The business has to track the sale because they have to put taxes on. They collect the government taxes. So it's really simple to do this. So, yep, here's our hand grenades, horseshoes, and nuclear weapons. We want to get close enough to get the job done. So, our formula. Old CPI minus, or new CPI minus the old CPI divided by the old CPI. And you go, what the heck are you talking about? Well, remember that market basket goods? We just add up how much all of them cost. That's the computer price index for that year. Then we take the market basket for a previous year and see what that all added up to. That's the old CPI. So here's what happens. In 2006, our market basket added up to $460.20. We want to compare it to last year, and that market basket added up to $434.40. That's the old CPI, that's the new CPI. We put the numbers together. Here's new, here's old, divided by old. So we do this one first. We get 25.8 divided by 434.4. We get 0.59, multiply it by 100 because the inflation is always in a percent. So the inflation rate with these numbers will be 5.9%. Or in other words, that nice dollar bill we had is worth 5.9 or buys 5.9% less stuff than it did the year before. Now there's another reason you may want to know this. You go into the boss's office and say you're looking for a raise. Boss says, great, you've been doing so good, I think you deserve a 4% pay raise. Using the same numbers that we had, we have an inflation rate of 5.9%. So here's your raise, here's inflation. You notice the raise did not cover all of the inflation, so you end up going from this to this. Standard of living is lower than what you had before, even with the raise. So you probably should at least know what the inflation rate is before you go in and ask the raise for the boss. All right, questions? Why? Because you're going to have homework, and get those back to me. Now, last thing in this chapter talks about the rule of 70s. Now, this is a thumb rule again. This is one of those in the ballpark things. In this particular case, if it comes out and it sounds good to you, then you want to do more investigation. You don't want to make a decision based off of this other than it's worth more investigation. The rule of 70s is just how long does it take to double your money, or how long does something, the price or the investment, double, okay? It's very simple. 70 divided by the annual rate of inflation or interest that you might get on an investment. Do you want to get in the game? That's the only thing you're looking for. If you like it, do more research. Don't base the decision off of this. If you don't like it, stop here. Don't waste your time. So you're efficiently using your time if you take a look at this rule of 70s. Now, here's the thing. Say the annual inflation rate is 3.4%. You have an investment of $1,000. How long does it take to double your investment? Well, let's see. 70 divided by 3.4. 20.58 years, you will reach 2,000. So if you want to wait for 20 and a half years to double your investment, this is what you want to do. If that does not sound good, forget it. Try something else. Now, questions? You can always go back and take a look at this because here you go. All right, now we do have three types of inflation. One we call demand pull. And these types of inflation go ahead and kind of get confusing sometimes. But literally, households are causing the demand pull because we are demanding more stuff. Which means, if we go back to our corn, we've got almost no corn left, but there's a whole lot more people that want corn. So all of a sudden we start raising the price of corn because there's too many people out there with lots of money and too little corn in here. So we actually we pull up the demand curve and increase the price of the products. That's demand pull inflation caused by households. Guess what? Cost push inflation happens from the households too. That's when we start demanding more money for our resources, such as labor. $15 an hour, that's what we should have. Well, first off, minimum wage, if you go back and do the research, was never meant to be a wage people lived on. Minimum wage was to be the wage of somebody getting new into the business so that they could go ahead and get experience and training and become a more productive person. And as they got more productive, they would get raises. Right? Minimum wage was never meant to be a wage to live on. So, we demand more money And literally, we are pushing up the cost of the supply of labor. So our supply curve goes up because we're increasing cost of labor, and businesses buying labor, they buy less because they can't afford it at $15 an hour. So cost push, we're pushing up the supply cost, again, comes from households. So in both cases, whether it's the demanders or the owners of the resources, it's households calling both of these. But one is going to pull up the demand curve, one's going to push up the supply curve. In either case, they both go up, and the extra cost is due to the demanders. Now, can countries push cost of resources so high that political decisions are required? Absolutely. Advanced economies run on energy. We need energy to produce stuff. Most of that energy comes from fossil fuels, oil, natural gas. For a long time, we depended on oil from the Sauds and everybody else over there in the Middle East area. Then came the 1973 Arab-Israeli War and OPEC. Now, OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Countries, stepped in, and this is why. All right, in 73, the Arabs started the war, Syria and Egypt, and they both started coming this way, and Israel then got their act together, kicked both their butts, and at one particular moment in time, there was nothing between the Israeli armored columns in Syria and Damascus. The Syrian army was destroyed. Also, same thing was going on in Egypt. There was almost a direct path to Cairo. And Syria and Egypt all of a sudden went, oh, wait a minute, stop. We need a ceasefire. Well, Israel didn't want to do that. They wanted to go ahead and end things and stop the war. But they decided to use oil. What they did was they went ahead and told the U.S. Now, remember, oil, OPEC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Iran, Kuwait, Iraq, Libya, Algeria, and then a few other countries over here. But they basically said, make Israel stop or we're shutting your oil down. We said, nah, we ignored them. And they said, okay, no oil. This is called a supply shock. All of a sudden, supply stops and we can't get any more anywhere. This is one of the reasons we have the strategic oil reserve. Just in case we do have a supply shock, we've got that oil reserve. But it's a shortage. And what happens when a shortage? Yep, prices go up. Price of gas skyrocketed, and we weren't getting any more supply in 1973. And this is what it looked like. These are the gas lines that we had. Literally, hey, here's the gas station. The line comes up, comes around this way, comes back up, and is over here. That's the line for the gas station. You had to have a certain number on your license plate depending on the day you went to fill up. As Monday, Wednesday, and Friday was even, and Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday was odd, or vice versa. And if you got in line and you had the wrong license plate, you actually had people getting shot by getting there. And you'd end up a lot of gas stations, because they simply didn't have the gas, were just closed because they didn't have it. So this is what happened in 73, and yes, we put pressure on Israel, and Israel stopped and everything else, but this was an oil shock that went ahead and decided political adventures. Now, today, same thing can happen, because China, not the Sauds anymore, or OPEC, because we're energy independent. We are actually exporting energy. But China, we have so much of our resources coming from China to come into our industries to go ahead and produce stuff, that if China gets upset at us, they could go ahead and say, well, you don't get this anymore. And all of a sudden we go, it could get to the point where we're doing the same thing here, that China can tell us what to do and we don't have any choice but to do it. Now, it is happening today, and this has to do with Europe and Russia. Right? So let's take a look. Russia started a war to seize some territory. Russia actually invaded Crimea and took it over and annexed it to its territory. They're supporting the rebels. In other words, they invaded the eastern part of Ukraine, and they got so much interference in the elections in Belarus that that's a pro-Russian government there, because Russia wanted that to happen. And they're also back in the Middle East supporting Syria, and Europe is going, please stop. And we go, well, why don't you just tell them to stop? Well, the problem is those nations run on fuel, fossil fuels, okay? And they get most of their fossil fuels from Russia. As a matter of fact, there's a new pipeline coming down this way that's going into Germany that they just, had a $400 or $600 million agreement with Russia on that to go ahead so they could finish it up. If they go ahead and say, stop, then Russia goes, cut the oil. And all of a sudden their economies crash. Now, the neat thing is because we are now energy independent and we are out there saying, hey, here's oil from us, there are now 13 terminals throughout Western Europe that are being built or expanded to take energy supplies coming from the United States to compete with the Russian oil and gas company. Now, if this happens, it's going to tank Russia, because their whole economy is based on dollars that they get from their gas and oil reserves. But it spurs competition, which means lower prices and the lower ability that Russia is going to be able to blackmail Western Europe. All right, last part. Effects of inflation are very felt on people on fixed income. Let's say this couple's getting $35,000 in 2018. That's their standard of living. Inflation is 5%. All of a sudden, their 2019 standard of living drops by 5%. Now they're getting that $30,000 fixed income. You know, like it's here's your Social Security check. So what they were able to buy last year, they have to cut back this year. So technically, what ends up happening is that $35,000 in 2018 becomes $33,250 in 2019. Even though it says $35,000 when they get it, it's only worth $33,250 in purchasing power compared to the year before. Right? So their standard of living dropped $1,750, or $1,750. All right. Damn it. The next are lenders, banks. They also get hit by effects of inflation, because what they do is when they take a look at how much interest they're going to charge you, they look at what's the market doing, what's GDP and all that, what's inflation doing, what's the government doing, what kind of risk are you, right? What kind of profit do they need to make, how long is the loan, right? They take this and a whole bunch of other stuff in concentration, and they go ahead and they add it up. And they say, well, this is the interest rate. We're going to calculate 2%. We come down with a total of, we're going to put 14% interest on your loan. So they get their profit and everything works hunky-dory until something happens and inflation actually hits 6%. They can't redo the contract. Contract's made. They should have put 19%, but they only put 14%. So now they're losing money. Okay? Negative 1% profit on this one. Not a good thing. So what's going on is the bank loaned good dollars, and they're being paid back with dollars that purchase less. Which actually is good for the borrowers. They're the ones that make out when we have inflation. Why? Because the bank loaned them dollars that bought more, And they're paying them back with dollars that buy less. Now remember, when we have inflation, that's also the reason we have increases in incomes. To keep up with inflation, which is basically what we've been doing for a while. But over the past couple of years, we have actually been increasing that so it's above inflation. So standard of living of the poor and middle class actually have been getting better because the percent of increase in their paychecks is higher than inflation. So your sheet should look like this. The article, we've got a jobs paper here. So go ahead and take a look at it. It's in the Canvas section. There's the section 2, there's the section 3 down there. Remember, there's the instructions on how to do it. Section 1, the facts. Section 2, the article questions. And we have 1, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, and 4 is a math problem. So you don't do a paragraph on that, you actually do the math to see if you can get it done. And then, of course, my 2 questions there. And remember, the second one of mine, it says, why is what you learned specifically important to you? Remember, that's the aha question. What light bulb did it turn on? And that's all for this section.